Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our grand finale concert. It's the end of our season, which is always bittersweet for us, but we will take a couple of weeks off afterwards and then start our Parks concerts and move to Art Park for a couple of weeks in July, so we hope we'll see you there. But it gives me an opportunity to say thank you to so many of you looking out and seeing you, so many of you who've been here for most of the concerts this year. How grateful the musicians and I are for this wonderful season that we've had. We've really had a great deal of pleasure in playing some extraordinary music, and we always try and save something special for the end. So we have a big Russian concert tonight. I mean, Russian first half and Berlioz French in the second half. Fantastic music. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and then at the end, tell you a bit about a very special season coming up, our 75th next year. But anyway, we start tonight with a piece, I think they named the concert after this piece, Fireworks by Stravinsky. Now, this is not Firebird, of course, which is Stravinsky's very famous ballet. This is Fireworks, and you probably haven't heard it. It's a very early piece of Stravinsky's. It was written when he was 25 years old, and he was still studying with his beloved teacher, Rimsky-Korsakov. And Rimsky, of course, was one of the great orchestrators, great painters of sound in using the orchestra, fantastic sense of color and blending of the instruments, really a painter. And Stravinsky learned that from Rimsky-Korsakov. And he actually wrote this piece, Fireworks, as a present for Rimsky. Rimsky's daughter was getting married, and Stravinsky thought, I will write him a little present, a celebratory present for the wedding. And he wrote it out, copied the parts, sent it off to Rimsky, and it came back a couple of days later. The package came back with a telegram saying that his beloved teacher had died. So the piece was never played for which it was intended, was the wedding of his daughter. But a year later, Stravinsky did have a chance to have it played. And this short piece is so important, historically so important, that I wanted you to hear it. And it's important because there was a very important man sitting in the audience that day. Diaghilev came to that concert. Diaghilev came to the concert in despair because he had just learned that the composer that he had initially hired to write the Firebird, Anatol Lyadov, had not even begun working on it. And it was going to be presented in a couple of months. So it just traumatized by this, and he went with a friend. He said, okay, we're going to go hear some new music. I'm going to find somebody. I'm going to just try and listen to these new composers and see what I think. And he heard this piece, Fireworks. And the story is very interesting because they got an incredibly lukewarm response from the audience. And even Diaghilev's friend was underwhelmed by it. But Diaghilev, who had the most exquisite taste in music, said to his friend, this man is a genius. He went right backstage and commissioned Stravinsky to write the Firebird for him. And then the rest was history, of course. After Firebird came Petrushka, came Rite of Spring, and came everything else, and marking Stravinsky as the most significant composer of the 20th century. But it all started with this little piece. So we hope we enjoy it. It's very early Stravinsky. You'll hear a little bit of something that maybe sounds like Dukas, Sorcerer's Apprentice in there. Definitely the influence of Rimsky-Korsakov. Lots of virtuoso woodwind writing, as you'll hear. But it's a great way, I think, for us to start our final concert of the season. Then we move on to another great Russian piece, this by Sergei Prokofiev, his third piano concerto. And this piece is truly one of the great virtuoso showpieces for pianists, and thrilling piece to listen to and to play. It was written in 1921, so a little bit after Stravinsky's work. He was only 30. And Prokofiev was an extremely precocious composer and writing at a very young age, great music. So while he was working on the piece, the Russian Revolution happened in 1917, and he decided to leave Russia and visit Europe and then the United States, much to the surprise of the Bolsheviks or the communists who came in, because they wanted him to stay. He said, they told him, you are a revolutionary in music and we are revolutionaries in life. We need to work together. But Prokofiev was very apolitical, and he felt he needed the stimulation of being in the West and hearing hearing music of Western composers. So he received permission to actually leave the Soviet Union. They were convinced that he would at some point come back. And he did. In 1933, he came back to the Soviet Union. He spent the last 20 years of his life there. Unlike his colleagues, Glazunov and Rachmaninoff and Stravinsky, who left and never returned, and they would never return because they repudiated the Soviet Union. They would never go back until the Tsar came back. He did go back, and was probably a decision that he regretted. Those of you who know about the end of Prokofiev's life was very difficult for him in the Soviet Union. But partly he decided to go back because he didn't really feel at home in the United States. He had a very rocky trip to the United States. He was detained in San Francisco for 3 days in kind of a jail because of worry about his communist links or something. And his music, when he finally made it to New York and began to perform his music, it was not well received at all in New York. The critics said things like, "This music is the epitome of godless Russia," or "The recipe for Prokofiev's music is simple. Just write anything that pops into your head, reverse all the sharps and flats, and then you have the piece." So Prokofiev then, he was very discouraged. He traveled to Chicago, and actually he had a much better success there. There was the conductor of the Chicago Symphony was a man named Frederick Stock, who liked Prokofiev's music and rehearsed it well and treated it with great respect. And he was very well received in Chicago. In fact, he was commissioned to write not only this piece, the piano concerto, but also a famous opera called Love for Three Oranges. The opera company commissioned him. He went back to New York, and he still had no success. And I think that, you probably will realize, have read this before. At that time, the feeling between New York City and Chicago, the sort of rivalry between those two big cities, was intense. And New York was not going to like anything that Chicago thought was good enough, and probably vice versa. So maybe it would have been impossible to have a success in both cities because they were very great rivals with each other for supremacy of which city was going to be more important in the 20th century. So Prokofiev had no success in New York, and these are his words, which are kind of poignant. He says, "As I wandered in the enormous park in the center of New York, looking at all the skyscrapers around it, I thought of all the wonderful orchestras in America who cared nothing for my music and would never play it. I thought of the critics tirelessly repeating what a great composer Beethoven is and reacting violently to anything that was new. I thought of managers arranging long tours for pianists playing the same old programs over and over. Maybe I had come here too soon. The child America is not old enough to appreciate new music." Now, he would be surprised to know how often his music is played now, but then it wasn't. He went back to Chicago, and he was working on the opera. And there's just a little insight into Prokofiev's character. The opera was delayed because of funding difficulties. So back then it was the same as it is still today, funding difficulties. And a great opportunity came up for the opera company. Because he was writing Love of Three Oranges, Sunkist offered to help. Well, this is absolutely true. I'm not making this up. Sunkist offered to help. They were going to underwrite the opera, and they were going to give everyone who came a free orange. Yes. But in return, Prokofiev had to allow them to put a sign in the lobby. This succulent and healthful brand inspired Prokofiev and is used exclusively by him at home. Now, Prokofiev, although he was, as I said, apolitical, was enough of a Soviet or enough of a communist to be horrified by this flagrant example of capitalism. And he absolutely refused. And actually, his refusal caused a great scandal with Sunkist and with the community of the city of Chicago, and he became famous. And actually, this kind of publicity made everyone want to come and hear this opera that had caused such trauma. So he was a big success in Chicago. He brought it to New York. Of course, it wasn't successful in New York, but he did play in Chicago based on the success of that opera, this piano concerto. And he played it himself. He was a brilliant pianist. It is a work of great vibrancy, tremendous virtuosity, wonderful balance. It's at the same time very new, but also very classical. Prokofiev was very influenced by Mozart and Haydn in much of what he wrote. It's devilish. I mean, it's filled with optimism, but also a little bit of a kind of sardonic sound, a sardonic twist, and very, very, very interesting for the pianist. We have a great pianist, Philippe Bianconi, who's been here before. Those of you who heard him play Saint-Saëns when he was here last, remember how great he was, and he's unbelievable in this piece. So that's our Russian first half. Second half, we turn to a piece that is a great deal of fun to play and hope to listen to, Berlioz Symphonie Fantastique. Now, when you hear this piece, you wouldn't believe how much earlier than those two 20th century pieces that I mentioned are. This piece was written in 1830, and it remains one of the most shocking, bizarre, and strange pieces ever written. Now, 1830, you have to realize Beethoven had just died, if you're thinking of Beethoven's music, and people like Schubert and Mendelssohn were writing kind of just the beginnings of romantic music, this kind of gentle, lyrical music. If you imagine the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto or Schubert Symphony, that was the music of the time. It was just the first stirrings of romanticism, very nuanced, very beautiful. Later on, of course, that romantic music would become much more fully blown and passionate, like in music of Tchaikovsky. But at this point, it was quite restrained. And in the middle of this period comes this unbelievably bizarre piece of music. It's so unlike anything written before or since that it's really hard to believe it was written then. And it still is one of the most original and unique pieces in our entire repertoire. Berlioz, who must have been quite a character himself, and we know because he did a lot of writing, so we know a little bit of what he was like, he was a very young man. And he was overwhelmed at that time by two passions in his life. Beethoven, who was his hero, and Shakespeare. Shakespeare was just being translated in the early 19th century into other languages so that people were reading him in their own language and discovering Shakespeare for the first time. Well, Berlioz he became obsessed with Shakespeare. And at that time, since people were interested in it, touring companies were coming to Europe from England presenting performances. Of course, they were in English, and Berlioz didn't understand English, but he went to all these performances. He went to every performance of Shakespeare that he could in Paris. And he went to particularly a lot of them that had an actress, a very beautiful Irish actress named Harriet Smithson. And she always played the romantic lead, Juliet or Ophelia. She had an incredible voice, supposedly. Tone of her voice was very beautiful, her speaking voice, and she was very beautiful. She had red hair. She was just a gorgeous actress. She became very famous. She became the rage of Paris, this Irish actress. And Berlioz went to every performance of hers. He tried desperately to attract her attention, but he was a 23-year-old young nobody. He waited backstage. He sent her letters, and she, I suppose, threw them out. She knew nothing about him. She never heard of him. She didn't realize that he was there all the time, and he became increasingly lovesick. He was lovesick for 3 years, thinking of Harriet Smithson. She, on the other hand, went home. She went back to England with her company, and knew nothing about it and about him. So instead, he poured this entire love that he had for her, this passion, into this piece. And the piece is actually autobiographical. It's his story, or his imaginary story. The subtitle of Symphonie Fantastique, which means like a fantasy symphony, not fantastic, but a fantasy symphony, is an episode in the life of an artist. And he actually, in case people didn't figure it out, he wrote very lengthy description in the beginning of the score about what this is about. So he says, this is the program. I'll just abbreviate a little bit. He writes, a young musician of unhealthily sensitive nature and endowed with a vivid imagination has poisoned himself with opium in a paroxysm of love-sick despair. The narcotic dose he has taken is too weak to cause death, but it throws him into a long sleep accompanied by the most extraordinary visions. And this piece tells of those visions. This is a person who's tried to kill himself. Can you imagine? This is right after Beethoven and Schubert's time. People must have been aghast at this piece. The first movement sets the stage. Visions and passions. He talks about the beloved. We hear the beloved's theme. He goes through being jealous, being in love with her, being lovesick, and being happy, being miserable, all in the first movement. The second movement, he's at a ball. And from a distance, he sees the beloved, but then the dancer starts swirling around and he loses her. And you hear the beloved theme in almost all all of these movements. It's her little theme. It's Harriet's theme. The third movement, he goes to a country to try and find solace. I think that's what it says. He's in the country musing when he hears two shepherds who are playing back and forth to each other. One shepherd plays, and another shepherd way up on the hill, or shepherdess, plays back to him. They have a love duet across the hills. And the piece is very beautiful. It's very bucolic. It's this wonderful setting in the country. But at the very end, a storm threatens. And when one shepherd plays to his companion, nobody answers. It's just, again, he's bereft. He's forsaken by Harriet. In the fourth movement, he dreams that he's so jealous that he's actually murdered his beloved. And he's sentenced to death. And death, of course, in Paris at that time was the guillotine. So this is the march to the guillotine. And you'll hear that very clearly. The drums are playing. He marches. And at the very last moment, just before the blade comes down, he hears her theme once more. And then the blade ends his life. But this piece is not over. The fifth movement, the fifth and final movement, he's in hell. And he dreams he's at a witch's sabbath in hell. And the witch there is none other than his beloved. So it's a very, very crazy piece, fantastically written. I mean, the imagination of Berlioz to write this is almost indescribable. He uses every resource of the orchestra to get this story across. English horn, which is very rarely used for the shepherd duet, two harps, E-flat clarinet, there are bells off stage, there are two tubas, the trombone, bass trombone is playing a low pedal note that sounds like a growl, the strings are playing col legno. These were things that were not written by anybody else at that time. They were unbelievably bizarre to people listening. Rossini actually heard this, and Rossini said, well, what a good thing it is that it's really not music. And that's really what was the prevalent feeling. But he reached, Berlioz, I have so much admiration for him. He reached into a kind of new world of sound, a new palette to try to convey this dramatic expression, much like Beethoven did, but Berlioz maybe went a step even further to try and convey this personal trauma in his life. And the music is, at times, extremely beautiful, because after all, it is a love story, too. It's his love for Berlioz's love for Harriet. Now, the ending of the story is very interesting. Berlioz lived with this love for 3 years, this unrequited love. He came back to Paris after he'd won the Prix de Rome. He was living in Rome for a while, writing. He came back to Paris in 1932, and he found out that Harriet was in Paris, still not knowing anything about him, but he arranged a performance of the Symphonie Fantastique, and he had friends invite her. So she came to the performance not having any idea that this piece was about her, none at all. But everyone else in the audience knew, because Berlioz was not shy about talking. Everybody knew, and she, of course, then realized, either during or after the performance, what this was all about. So they met the next day for the first time she met Hector Berlioz, and they were married several months later. But it's not so happy, though. The dream faded. The fairy tale ended, I guess you could say, because they within a few years, they were very miserable. And they separated after a decade of marriage. So, but anyway, this piece sort of remains as an unforgettable testament to the love of this young man for this unattainable woman of his dreams. And it is enormously fun and very filled with color and vivid passion and all kinds of wonderful things going on in the orchestra. So we hope you will enjoy that. Now, I mentioned that we're ending our season, our 74th season, so we are just about to mark a big milestone for us, 75 years of the Buffalo Philharmonic. And You know, we think about 75 years. That's 75 years, a lot of music on this stage, and at least for 70 of those years was on this stage. A lot of music on the stage, a lot of great artists who've been here. Some of them you remember very clearly. A lot of wonderful musicians, members of the Buffalo Philharmonic. It's amazing history. But the most amazing part of the history is the history of the supporters and the people who come to the concerts and kept this orchestra playing music for 75 years. That's the real story, and that's the real celebration next year. So we tried to put together a special program that you would especially like, I hope, to mark this incredible milestone for us. So 75 years, I'm so happy about this. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the season. Starting off with Midori. Now, Midori has not been here for a long time, but I know how much you love her playing. She's one of my favorites, too. She's coming to open up our season playing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, the great Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. So we're really looking forward to seeing her again. In October, we have a beautiful program. This young woman you haven't heard, she's making her debut in Buffalo, Tianwo Yang, but she is one of the most astonishing players I have ever heard. Unbelievable technical ability, very young, and she's playing a piece that some of you might know called Butterfly Lovers. It's the most famous piece ever written in China. It's as famous in China as maybe our Rhapsody in Blue is here. It is an absolutely beautiful piece about two lovers who fall in love but are not allowed to marry each other by their families and die of broken hearts. And it's a very beautiful piece. On that program, well, we'll also have on that program Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra. So it's all about famous lovers. The next concert is something that we haven't done before. We're dedicating this entire concert to Polish repertoire in honor of Chopin's 200th birthday. Fantastic, romantic Polish music. And Weronika is Polish, and she goes by one name, she told me, because nobody can pronounce her Polish last name. So she doesn't use it anymore. You'll probably see it in the program, but she just goes by Weronika. Fantastic pianist from Poland, and she'll be playing Chopin, second piano concerto in honor of his birthday. We have Leon Botstein coming. Leon Botstein, the conductor of the American Symphony Orchestra in New York, and a great scholar and a fantastic intellect and wonderful conductor, coming to work with our chorus, our beloved chorus, in two pieces by Brahms, Schicksal's Lied and Nania, which we have not done for a long time. So that's going to be a beautiful, beautiful program of Brahms. Next, Gershwin Festival. Next year we're celebrating a lot of Gershwin because we're recording Gershwin for Naxos. So we have a lot of Gershwin on the program. And Orion Weiss is coming to record with us all of the Gershwin pieces, Rhapsody in Blue, Second Rhapsody, Concerto in F. I got rhythm variations, so you'll hear Gershwin, our country's maybe most beloved composer. Next, we have a guest that I'm also very happy about, Lynn Harrell. The great cellist Lynn Harrell is coming to play the Elgar Cello Concerto, one of the most beautiful cello concertos, made famous mostly by Jacqueline Dupre. Some of you remember Jacqueline Dupre made this piece. Well, it's a fantastic piece. And we'll be playing Brahms 4. So that, I think, is a concert I'm especially looking forward to, the Elgar and Brahms with Lynn Harrell, long overdue here. Then this is sort of my holiday gift to myself. I get to conduct Classical Christmas, which I really love. I really enjoy this program, and as you remember, it's a program of a lot of classical music that celebrates the holiday season, and that will be a lot of fun for me. So that's in December. The big news for our anniversary season, Long Long. And the Long Long is probably internationally the most famous soloist we have now in the world. He rose from obscurity in mainland China, got himself somehow to Curtis, and is an unbelievable dynamo on the piano. I mean, you can get an idea of that from him, but he's also quite a character too, but he is truly one of the most astonishing virtuosos ever on piano, surpassing probably anyone else before him. He's an unbelievable player. He's never played in Buffalo. He's never played in Western New York, so this will be his debut here. We're very excited that we got him, and he's coming because it's our 75th anniversary. He likes to be able to celebrate special years with orchestras. So next we do our Mozart concert. We've in the winter we've always devoted one concert to Mozart, which doesn't need any explanation. the greatest composer of all time. This will have the Elvira Madigan Concerto on it, played by Terence Wilson, Magic Flute Overture, and also a piece by Haydn, who was a colleague, of course, of Mozart. Moving on, we're very, very happy that we are featuring one of our own players. This is Christine Bailey Davis. Some of you know Christine. Christine grew up in Hamburg, and she is one of the very few members of the Buffalo Philharmonic who actually is from this region. So we're very proud to present her as soloist. She's going to be playing a piece by Lowell Lieberman for flute, fantastic piece, and we'll play Tchaikovsky Fifth on that program as well. Another Buffalo girl, Laura Aiken. Laura Aiken is one of the most famous sopranos in the world. And she told me a couple of years ago that she has never sung in Kleinhans. And I said, that's just something we have to fix right away. So she's coming. She's a fabulous, fabulous singer. She's going to be singing Strauss' Four Last Songs. Beautiful Strauss. And we have Don Juan on that program and also Debussy La Mer. So beautiful program. Continuing a little bit with our Polish celebration, Antoni Witt is the leading conductor in Poland, and he's coming to work with us. The musicians are a little frightened of this. They said well, maybe he's probably much friendlier than he looks in that picture. I don't know, since he's coming from Poland, his good colleague Jacek Music is going to be his soloist. You know, Jacek, our principal horn, of course, is from Poland, and he's playing Mozart Horn Concerto No. 4, so that's going to be a great program. Celestial Classics, they didn't tell you what's on there, but we're doing Holst's The Planets. That's the celestial part of it, and one of the great showpieces of all time, Holst's The Planets, paired with Mozart Jupiter Symphony. So it's all about the planets. And then moving on, our associate conductor, Matthew Kramer, is going to conduct a wonderful program, a sort of Pan-American program. Samuel Barber is celebrating his 100th birthday this year, and Jennifer Coe is going to play the Barber Violin Concerto, truly maybe our country's greatest violin concerto that we have, Barber. And Copeland, Billy the Kid, a great piece. A little Hinastera on there as well. Chris O'Reilly, all of you know Chris. Everyone who's ever listened to From the Top knows Chris O'Reilly. He's a fantastic person, very funny person, a great host of the show, but also an incredible pianist. And he's coming just to showcase his piano talents. He's going to be playing the Grieg Piano Concerto with us, a great piece. Michael Ludwig, our concertmaster, is going to be playing a new piece written for him. This is very interesting. Darren Hagen is writing a new piece for Michael based upon American folk songs. I thought that's very beautiful. Amazing Grace, Wayfaring Stranger, a lot of American folk songs will make up the basis for a new violin concerto. And to complement that, we're also playing a piece by Morton Gould, all made up of folk songs of Stephen Foster. So it's going to be a very unique first half, and we end with Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral Symphony. Our final concert of the season, Verdi Requiem, the greatest Requiem, Verdi's greatest opera, as they say, the Verdi Requiem. So to celebrate the 75th, we put together what I think is a very, very special year. And I hope that some of you are already planning to be with us, but I hope that you will not miss this milestone in your Buffalo Philharmonic's history. So thank you for being with us all season. Thank you for coming to celebrate our closing concert, and we hope you enjoy yourselves tonight. Thank you.